David Leonard. Some of you might not know the name, but he's a very important figure in the audio industry here in Montreal. He started the Trebas Institute, which by now is famous, and many musicians went there for studies. And we're happy to have him here today, here in La Scena Tête. So, hello, David.
Hi, glad to be here with you.
Awesome, awesome. So, look, I guess I guess some people might not know you. So I would start there. Maybe if you could explain who you are and what was your career like to start. For the people that maybe don't are not familiar with your name.
Well, I'm not sure where I should start. Should I start when I was 5 years old or 25? But
I
I was
guess
always
more like
interested
an
in music.
overall picture, more like an overall picture.
I studied classical music with a piano with a private music teacher when I was 5 years old. When I was 9 years old, I was already playing some Handel concertos and some Bach and Chopin. And my parents, when I was 9 years old, this was actually in 1949, before even tape came out, my parents took me downtown to a music store that had a little recording studio. Well, basically, the room was just a little bit larger than the upright piano that was in the room. And just outside of that was a disc player. And I played my pieces and came out of the room. And then the technician, whose name was actually John Bradley, who worked with the Berlinger brothers back in the 1930s on the development of the phonograph record. He was the recording engineer. He dropped the needle on the soft cut, and I heard myself back. I was kind of thrilled, because this is in the early days. Remember, late 40s.
This is late 40s, okay.
And then back in the early the mid 50s, my parents, my mother in particular, was interested in music. She was a contralto, but didn't perform publicly. But we used to have musicals in our house. We had a grand piano, and once a month, it was usually Fridays or Saturday nights, we'd have a little chamber orchestra, chamber group coming in with people who were eventually well known as musicians with the Montreal Symphony and with the McGill Chamber Orchestra. And Maureen Forrester, contralto, also came in. And my father, who had very good musical ears and was interested in music, but had no musical background per se, said, we should record some of these musicals at home.
So these musicals were just for fun.
Yeah, but we can't get a tape recorder, a pro machine here. So we went down to New York and bought one of these professional tape recorders. And in one of the images that you have, you'll see the little setup that I eventually put together. My father said, half jokingly, says, when a father buys his son a razor for his 12th or 13th birthday, it's for the purpose of shaving, not to open a barber shop. So my father bought this tape recorder for fun. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps. He was a doctor. I said, medicine's not for me. So I started playing around with the tape recorder, and eventually had over 100 bands, mainly rock, pop, rock bands, come to the house, where I didn't have a studio built per se, but the living room was the studio. And I recorded these bands with very modest, simple equipment initially. And every time I did a session, there were one or two other recording studios in town. There was RCA, and they would only do union gigs with professional musicians. And they also charged an hourly rate that a lot of new bands, garage bands, couldn't afford. So they would come to me, and I would charge a third of what they did, like $6,
This is at age
$8 an
12.
hour.
We're already like doing a business out of this.
I'm sorry?
This is at age 12. You already started a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
business.
12, 13 years old. That's right. And at age 15, I got, well, you know, most kids get summer jobs at, I don't know, grocery stores,
Yeah.
you know. I got a job at a company called Soundscription Service. It was a company that did recordings primarily. They would go into companies that wanted to record the boardroom meetings, and instead of having a secretary take down every word, we would record it and then transcribe it. But we had professional equipment, so I was there doing some recordings, and then they also had a disc cutter. So I learned at the age of 15 disc cutting. I was cutting some discs, not only for these corporate clients, but also some people would come in with, they wanted to have a wedding or a bar mitzvah or some other event recorded, but they didn't have tape recorders themselves. So I would have to cut after recording on tape, on the Ampex tape machine, would transfer the recording to a disc that they could play, 33 1/3 RPM.
Yeah.
You know. And that I was still in high school. An interesting thing about the high school that I went to, which was a government public school, the principal had some very unusual thoughts about music as far as the guys were concerned. The girls could be in the choir, they could be taking music courses, but the guys, no, it was all academic stuff. So because my parents, my mother in particular, wanted me to stick with the music, I went to another high school one afternoon a week to be in the band and playing my clarinet. But here I wasn't.
Okay.
So I had the skill on the piano and the clarinet, but the principal was very adamant about the guys. Yet, and by the way, one of the kids in my high school class that was sitting next to me became the Attorney General and Minister of Justice for Canada. Another one became the Minister of Revenue for one of the provinces, and others. One became chairman of a big technology company in aerospace, Pratt and Whitney Aircraft.
Yeah.
And then there was one other kid in the class, like myself, who really was interested in music. There were a few of us, and he was in the history class. He's writing a song, and the teacher thought he was holding up his history book and reading the history book. No, he's writing a song. And he goes to England, and to make the long story short, he has this song recorded that he wrote by a singer called Lulu, and the song was called To Sir With Love. The song also became the title and the featured song in the movie with Sidney Poitier called To Sir With Love. And this composer, songwriter, Mark London, had in 1967 what became the #1 record, #1 song of the year, not just in our country, but worldwide on the Billboard charts. And to this day, still living off the royalties on that one song. And kind of laughing at the teacher who said, "You can't make a living in the music business. Get back to your history book."
So, David, before you continue with the narrative there, because I don't want to jump this point, how was the technology then when you recorded those people, like those conferences, and also the bands that were the musicales that were the musicals that were at your house, like, because it's very different from nowadays. So I would like to know a little bit more about that.
I didn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars. And here I am as a student. I would do a session with the basic machine, which I had 10.5-inch reels and ran at the professional speed of 15 inches per second, as opposed to home recorders that went at 7.5 and 3 3/4. So it was a good machine. But one limitation was microphones, plural. Yeah. So I had one good microphone, a condenser microphone. And every time I did a session, if it was 10 hours, $10 an hour, $100, I'd invest in another mic eventually. Now, what about reverberation or echo chambers? Well, there's no way I was going to get the professional studios EMT European reverb chamber, which was running between $5,000 and $10,000 back then. So I had a microphone and a loudspeaker set up in the shower at home. And I said to my mom, don't turn on the shower. I got the loudspeaker, the microphone in there, and I fed the sound into the shower, which gave it a reverberant sound. Sometimes I would use the garage where we had the cars. So that was the reverb chamber.
Oh my
You
God.
have to be very creative and innovative, you know?
So so this microphone is so let's say you had a rock band, typically 4 or 5 people. So how do you like you take one microphone for everybody? How do you?
Well, initially it was one microphone for everybody. Then I got there's a company that's still around, but they don't make microphones anymore, called B&O, Bang & Olufsen. They had a ribbon microphone, a B&O 50, which I should have kept, but I gave it away a number of years ago. It was a beautiful microphone. So, so I had 2 microphones, and also had a 639 Western Electric. And sometimes for a certain session, if the band really demanded it, I'd go out and rent a few other microphones and get a simple mixing board. Eventually, I bought the mixer as well, and eventually I also had a disc machine to cut records for the bands, because that's what they wanted for themselves, and to hand in to record companies as demos to show off what they can do as musicians and as songwriters. Tape players were not that common in the record executives' offices back in the early and mid 60s. They had machines, but they were very, very poor quality, but they all had very good quality record turntables. So I would cut their record. And in fact, one time I was at RCA Studios to do a cut from a tape that I had. And I'm sitting in the lobby, and the guy next to me is a music publisher, and he says, "You're in the music business?" I said, "Well, I record some stuff at home." He says, "I have a song here. It's called The Beatles Are Coming," written by one of their associates. And this was in May of '64, and the Beatles were coming to America and to Montreal, Toronto, New York in September of '64. RCA passed up on that record because they said a song called The Beatles Are Coming is only good before. I mean, it's no good the day after and a year after. And since we're not really in the production of local bands, by the time we found someone and signed them up, it would be too late. So, "Mr. Leonard, would you be interested in having the song?" I said, "Sure, but I don't sing." He said, "No, we're giving you the rights to it. Find a band and record it. We're giving you the rights." I said, "Okay." So I quickly went down to a nightclub. I had the demo with me, and I said to the band, you want to listen to this song?" I said, "Oh, you like to record it?" "Really? We can record it?" I said, "Yeah, I have the rights to it." So we got the band and the girl singer, recorded it. Now the challenge was, what do I do with the finished recording? Well, there's a fellow called Alex Sherman, passed away a number of years ago. He was Mr. Records for Canada. He had a couple of hundred record outlets across the country, and he owned a number of stores, record stores. So I went into this store where he was based here in Montreal, played the record for him. He says, "Oh, do you have a record distribution deal?" I said, "No." He says, "You know what? I'd be interested in taking it on. what label would you like to be on? I said, do we have a choice? He says, look, I'm Mr. Records. When I take it on, I buy 5,000 copies just for a starter. So let's go up to London Records, see if they're interested. I said, oh, that's good. London Decca is affiliated with the Beatles as well. So what was the deal? The deal was we split the royalties 50-50 between Alex Sherman and me. What about a contract? He said, I trust you. I don't want my name on the record. When you get a royalty check, just give me half of what you get. That's the deal. I said, that's very interesting. So the song was on the radio within 24 or 48 hours, and they were playing it every 15 minutes. The Beatles Are Coming. I go back to the president and vice president of London Records a couple of weeks later, and I said, how are the sales doing, and so on. And by the way, can you get me tickets to the Beatles concert? They're coming here on September the 4th. There's no way. I mean, those tickets were gone almost before they were printed. However, would you mind being backstage with them? I can get you backstage. I thought for a fraction of a second. I said, sure. So here I am, I'm 24 years old, producer of this record, The Beatles Are Coming. Now I'm in the business. What about school? I had 1.5 credits to go to finish my bachelor's degree. Not interested. Didn't finish the degree. Now I'm in the music business. I eventually, years later, I went back to finish the degree and also to do master's studies in educational technology and television production and curriculum design. But at this time, I'm in the business and got my act on the local TV shows. And then I became the production manager for a record company called Allied Records, which is a Canadian company distributing Pi Records of England and Time, Elektra, Mainstream, and a number of other labels. Stayed there for a little while and came across a band that asked me if I could get them a record deal. Well, I got them a record deal in Canada and with distribution in the United States as well, and also got them booked into what was the #1 nightclub in the world at the time. The Peppermint Twist was the big dance craze, and the club that I'm talking about was the Peppermint Lounge, just off Times Square, 45th Street in New York City. So they're working there, and I'm managing them. I got them booked on various TV shows. And one of the guys at some point said, you know what, we think we can manage ourselves. We don't want you as a manager anymore. I said, oh, got a union contract. It's approved and it's signed, and I put a lot into you guys. No, we think we can do it on our own. So I said to myself, I guess I'm really a recording engineer, producer guy, and I would love to see a New York recording studio. I'm in New York now with the band. So I walk into this studio, Belltone Recording on 31st Street. And the owner says, oh, would you like to rent the studio? I said, no, I'd just like to see the studio. I'm not from this area, I'm from Montreal. Oh, well, you're very lucky because there's nothing going on in the main studio. Let me take you on a tour. Shows me around the studio itself, the mastering room, and he looks at my hand where I'm holding a bunch of 45 7-inch phonograph records. And he said, what are those? I said, oh, these are some records that I produced. Oh, on the Columbia label, London label. Could we listen to a couple of records that you did? Put it on the turntable. And right away, the owner says, would you like a job here? I said, I'm here with a toothbrush with my band that I'm managing. I'm not even from the area here. not even from the United States. He says, we could work something out, but you have to tell us the next day or two. And you start on Monday. So we worked out everything, and I became a recording engineer. Initially, sweeping the floors, cleaning the ashtrays, and eventually got lucky when the boss was on vacation and the other engineer, the chief engineer, was sick, and they had the Motown band in from Detroit backing up this particular singer. Her name is Dee Dee Warwick. Her sister is well known, Dionne Warwick, and her cousin, just trying to remember her name now, very, very well known vocalist. Anyway, now I'm doing this session with 25 to 30 musicians in the studio, because this was before synthesizers were invented. If you wanted the sound of a horn section and strings, they all came in. You had the arranger there. So here I am doing a recording, which actually was nominated for a Grammy Award, called "I Want to Be With You." Great record, great vocalist. And other artists too would come in, like Miles Davis and Chet Atkins, some country artists. I did quite a few recordings there. And then there was an article about me in the trade paper Cashbox. Canadian David Leonard is working in New York, blah, blah, blah. And the owner of a record label and recording studio in Toronto had just built the first multi-track recording studio in Canada. And he had an engineer that he brought in from Motown in Detroit, but they were having problems with the sound and they weren't sure, was it the equipment or was it the engineer? We're getting distortion and all kinds of problems sonically. So he asked if I would come up to Toronto for a weekend. I'd be back at my job. And
Hello? Well, that was David Leonard. I think we're having a little difficulty with him with his camera. He just suddenly went out. Sorry about that. This is La Scena Tête. We're talking today with David Leonard, who is a recording engineer, lots of experience, and the founder of the Treba Institute here in Montreal, the Recording Arts Institute, Treba. If you have any questions for him, please leave them in the chat. I'm going to try to check it out, see if there are any questions for him. And so I'm just going to look to my right, try to solve, see what the problem is right now with his audio and his video, because we just lost him. So please please be patient a little bit and let me try to figure out. All right, so if you're in the chat, like it's the moment, it's the moment to put some questions so I can write it down for David or for me. If you have any question regarding the tête-à-tête or anything that regarding David, you can send them right away in the chat, and I'll try to write it down and answer to it. So if not, I'm gonna profit this moment that David's still not connected to tell you of some great news that are happening right now with La Scena Musicale. We will be having a concert for the 14th of February with St. Valentine's Day. So we're celebrating with music, and we have really great artists from Canada and from all over the place. So we have, let me think some names. Raphael Paquette is going to be singing in her trio. We have Marc-Antoine Dragon. We have Wakun Chan, the editor here of La Scena Musicale. And I'm forgetting right now other names, but really it's going to be a great concert. I will be doing a number there also with Valérie Poisson and Charles Rocchiero for our ensemble, the Time Travel Recital Ensemble. It's a quartet that we have now. And it's going to be actually our first like public video, if you want. So I invite you to watch that on February 14th. If not, we are also doing actually the Saint Valentin Chantant. So we do a little song over the phone. We take your orders on La Scena website, so myscena.org, and you can order a song, choose your singer, and then on Saint Valentine we call the person and sing it live, either live on the phone or pre-recorded or even in Zoom. So that's I think that's a great different original song, original gift that you can give for St. Valentine's instead of the typical flower. It's a song, a live song by an opera singer or a pop singer. You can choose. We have again like an immense amount of talent there on the website for you to choose. Now I'm gonna go to my right again and try to check if David is around. Well, I don't know. I'm really getting worried about David. He's not around still. I'm really wondering what happened there. I think I'm gonna have to disconnect or something. I don't get what's happening right now. Sorry about that. Sorry about that little inconvenience for everybody. We're waiting here for David Leonard to reconnect. We lost him during the connections during the interview. Hearing a lot of things interesting by him, like he was in contact with all this generation of great artists, and even the singer. I researching today, I found out that the singer from Megadeth, Dave Mustaine, singer and guitar player, went to his school trebas. I wonder like how that happened, because I mean, a rocker like that, you would think like doesn't care about recording and that, but sometimes it's quite the opposite. He's also worked with René Angelil, and the manager of the popular singer. What's her name? Dion. Celine Dion. I'm thinking Chantal Dion, the Quebecois soprano. So anyways, I really hope we can continue this conversation with him. I'm going to look back again, see if I can fix something. We'll be back, okay? Sorry about that. Thing went off. Which one? Thing. He went offline and that's it. This? Yeah. The computer was like doesn't appear anymore. Where's your phone? Where is my phone? Thank you. Hello, David. Yeah. What happened? Yeah, no, well, I'm yes, but you're not in the program anymore. Can you try to go back to the email when I send you the link and reconnect? Excellent. No, I don't see you in here in the connection. No, no. David, let me send you again. I'll send you an email again with the link. Connect to this link. Go to this link. I'm sending you the link again. Go to it. Go to it now. Let's see if that's how that works. No, I just send. I just send you. Just send you.
I don't see it. Oh, okay.
You're out now.
So we're back.
Okay. All right. So I'm hanging out.
Okay. Okay. No audio. I don't hear you. I don't hear you.
All right, so
I see
we're
you.
back.
Oh, now I hear you as well. I hear
All
and see.
right, so happy.
Okay.
Well, that's the technology problems now.
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
We can hear you and see you. So we're talking about, I guess, where do you it fall off in well, you are now in Belton Studios, and you were called to come back to Canada to fix some issue with the.
So I went actually I went to the record company in Toronto, and stayed there for a while, recording all kinds of bands, and then the World's Fair, 1967 World's Fair, was being developed in Montreal, and I heard there was an opening for an audiovisual tech person to supervise the theme pavilions from a technological point of view, which I did. And one of the theme pavilions was put together by a fellow who started a company eventually called IMAX. Anyway, so here I was working on these, what I would call exotic format films. And at the end of the World's Fair, job is terminated. That's it. What am I going to do now? Well, I better go back to university and finish off that Bachelor of Arts degree. And then I went on and continued with the master's degree program, and also a doctoral program in communications at McGill University. And eventually I was even asked to come back and teach a communications course in the Faculty of Management to the last year students in management, a course on communication skills. And that was actually at the same time that I was putting together the idea for starting my own college, the trebas Institute, a college, career college that would teach some very unusual courses that were not being offered many other places. In fact, I discovered mine was the first private career college to offer courses in audio engineering and record producing, songwriting, arranging, and the business of music.
When you say
the business,
first,
like copyright law, music publishing, and artist management, and marketing and promotion, and so on.
Right. But okay, but when you say the first school, do you mean like worldwide? Nowhere in the world there was that school that taught the.
There were a handful of universities in the United States that had recording programs. There was also one I discovered, started in 1939 in Detmold, Germany, of all places, just before World War II. And it was called the Tonmeister program, basically to train and educate people in a 4-year program to become masters of sound in every respect. So I invited the director of that program to come over, and we sat down together, and I researched some of the other schools that were running audio programs, 2-year, 4-year programs. I thought I had a good idea, but just to give me a little bit more confidence, when I saw an article in Billboard, the music trade magazine, about a meeting that was going to take place in Nashville, the year that I started Trebas, 1979, and this meeting was to set up a new association for educators that would be involved in music business, recording arts, audio engineering programs. So I figured I might learn something from these American universities, New York University, University of Miami, University of Colorado. So I went down with my curriculum, my little brochure, and we were all compared. There were about 8 or 10 of us. We were all comparing our respective curricula. And this was just after Elvis Presley had just passed away. And the fellow who was Elvis's recording engineer, Bill Porter, got a job at the University of Miami to set up their audio engineering program. So he was at this meeting with a few other people that had started recording programs and music business programs in the United States. And there I was amongst these others, and they were looking at my curriculum and they said, my goodness, David, your curriculum is far ahead of anything that we're doing here in the United States. You have a course in digital audio, vinyl records. There's no digital. I said, it's going to happen in the next few years. I know. So we have a course called digital audio. I also had a course called the relationship between music and television. Well, MTV, the music television network, came out 5 years later. So I was a little bit ahead of it.
When was this? In the 80s, I guess, 1980?
This was 1979, but the MTV was 1985. Okay. And the CD came out, the first digital recording came out in March of 1983. So yes, I was a little ahead of the times. And the other members of the association from Belmont University, University of Miami, New York University, they all thought that I should be on the board of directors of this Nashville American association called the Music and Entertainment Industry Educators Association. Well, I was very proud to even be amongst these other leaders. And I was the vice president for the first 2 years, and the president from 82 to 84. And have been very interested in helping other colleges and universities to get set up with similar programs all over America. A lot of music programs were saying now, wow, we could probably increase our enrollment if we added some courses that are related to music, but more about the business of music and recording. So this was happening in the 80s and the 90s. And of course, today there are a lot of universities and colleges with similar programs across the United States, Canada, and around the world. So in 1979, I started the college, Trebas Institute, and ran it for 41 years until last year, 2020, when I sold it to a international private university with 80,000 students worldwide. And while I was running the school, I had over the 40 years, 20,000 students go through. And of all those students, there were quite a few that got nominated for and won Grammy Awards, over a dozen in total, by the way. And some of my graduates were working with leading artists like Elton John and Paul McCartney and Miley Cyrus, Katy Perry, and a lot of the legends in the music industry, and doing a lot of motion picture films. Like one of the grads was doing the music recording and mixing for The Hunger Games and Across the Universe, Cold Mountain, and Oh Brother Where Art Thou, and a lot of major films. And a lot of our graduates also got into management positions running the music licensing organizations and being on the senior management teams of Universal Music Group and a lot of major record companies. So we've had a lot of major successes. In fact, there was in Times Square, New York, there's a big electronic video board. And there's actually an image of Robert Plant with one of my graduates who was nominated for and received the 3 Grammys for Record of the Year, Album of the Year, and it's right there in Times Square on the big screen. So I'm very proud of every time I hear of a graduate that's doing very well and happy, found a new career that goes beyond being a musician, but really learning the business of music. It really thrills me. As a matter of fact, one day, the director at one of my campuses comes over to me and said that there's one particular student that is just thrilled with the program, would love to meet you. So I said, sure, I'll be glad to meet him. Comes over and he said, oh, Mr. Leonard, sir, I'm a musician. My name is David Mustaine. I said, that name rings a bell. Yeah, well, I used to be with a band called Metallica. And now, more recently, I started a band called Megadeth, a rock band. And I said, well, Megadeth has sold millions of records. I mean, you're very successful and very famous. He said, well, famous, successful, creatively, yes. But the reason I'm here at your school is I'm in the artist management program because I want to learn about management, how not to get screwed. I don't see the royalty checks coming in, even with the millions of records sold. So, of course, he was probably one of the most famous people that have ever come to our college as a student after being famous. René Angelil is another person I wanted to just mention, because he had a son, Patrick, who said, Dad, I'd love to work with you in managing this young girl that you've signed up called Celine Dion. He said, look, son, I don't have time to teach you management. You go to Dave Leonard's Trebas Institute, take the artist management program, which he did. And he became the tour manager for Celine. And we've had quite a few successes like that. But as long as the students and graduates are happy, they don't all have to become famous. But if they can have a job, a career in the business that they love, that makes me happy.
So David, well, great to know all this information. I would like to know more about, go into details about some things like you're saying, like Dave Mustaine, who I mean, Megadeth, one of the biggest, or was at least one of the biggest metal bands around, and he's talking about the situation about getting screwed by management and trying to understand more. Could you elucidate a little bit what was kind of, for example, if you want to take him as a sample, if you can, or some other artists that you can say, how did it work, how the contracts work, and why this kind of situation happened, where the artists were working a lot, they were very famous, but still like not getting any money.
A contract is only as good as the paper it's not written on. Let me give you 2 contrasting examples. One, I mentioned before about Alex Sherman and the record that I produced, The Beatles Are Coming. He didn't want a written agreement. He trusted me. And, you know, there was a trust between us. He was a loyal person and a trustworthy person. And he said to me that I should sign the contract with London Records, and when I get royalty checks, send half to me. It was very honest and simple, straightforward. No contract. Although I do agree that a short pencil is better than a long memory. It's always good to have a contract. But now let's talk about this band that I was managing, in 64, 65, and got them booked on major TV shows and really moved them to where they wanted to be. And I discovered long after I'd signed the band up that one of the members in the band had a father who was in some rather questionable let's say, questionable industries, and not the kind of person you want to deal with. And I was threatened by the band. We're breaking the contract. I said, this is an AFM, American Federation of Musicians contract, following all the regulations and done everything to get you to where you are today. Booked on American Bandstand, Ed Sullivan Show. And he said, look, we're constantly, you want to end up at the bottom of the Hudson River here in New York with cement shoes? I said, no, I don't think so. Well, we're breaking the contract. We want the contract back. We're going to manage ourselves. So that goes to show you at the other extreme that a written contract doesn't mean anything if it's not between honorable people. So there you go, two extreme cases, the contract. Yet I would say that for budding musicians, whether they're opera singers, classical jazz, or what have you, when you're starting out, you probably can't afford a manager. In fact, no one would want to manage you because managers don't get a salary and you're just starting out. They usually get a percentage, 10, 15, maximum 20% of your earnings. But if you're not earning very much, then they're earning even less. You're not going to get them. Could you get a major artist manager, somebody who's managing some super successful people? Probably not, because you're just starting out. They're not going to spend the time with you, even if you've got great talent. So you've got to start out with a manager, somebody that you could trust. It could be somebody in the family, but it should be somebody with some entertainment management, entertainment law knowledge and experience. And you know, we could spend hours talking about what goes into an artist management contract.
Yeah, can you maybe like do a little bit of that, like maybe not hours, but
Right.
what's the
Okay.
what's the point of that? If you're saying already that at the end the contract is really difficult to apply it, why do we write it anyways?
So what you
And
what
what
you
kind of
want,
things? Yeah.
I want to make this clear. There's a difference between an agent and a personal manager. An agent has a Rolodex and represents many, many artists and waits for the venues to call up and say, oh, we need a such and such. We need a vocalist or a pianist. And so they go in the Rolodex, they pull out from their 100. They don't represent any particular artist. A personal manager represents you, the singer or musician. And generally, an artist manager will not manage 20 or 30 artists. They will handle one. In the case of Redding Angelil, Celine Dion, they got married eventually. As a matter of fact, I have this little trick question. Can an artist manager ask for 50% 50% commission from an artist? Elvis Presley's manager did, and that was the first and last time. But generally 15, 20%. Anything more than that, you could probably have it canceled in a court of law. It would be unethical, except René Angelil signed up for 50%. Why? Because he was married to Celine. But all that aside, you were signed with a manager for a limited period of time. Some management agreements will go on for 10, 20 years. Some will not last at all. So here are some of the things that you want to have in that agreement. First of all, the basics of your name and contact and his name or her name and contact, and a definition of what the manager will be responsible for. Remember, the manager is not hiring you, the singer or musician. You are hiring the manager as an employee of yours, but working on a percentage basis, percentage of your earnings in performances, recordings, and other sources, maybe films and books that you put together eventually. Now, if you sign for a long term, which a manager will want, why? because for the first couple of years, it's going to be no money coming in for either you or for the manager. It's developing you as an artist, a performer. So the manager wants a long-term contract, not for 1 or 2 years, because 1 or 2 years is the investment time, and then you and the manager will reap the benefits. You, on the other hand, as the musician, singer, want to sign for a short period of time. So there's a compromise. You come up with something in between, the short and the long. Now, you could have, let's say, a 5-year agreement, but to protect yourself as the musician or the singer, you put in a clause that has minimal requirements of the manager that are specified. Requirements could be very descriptive, or they could be very financial. That if at the end of year 1, the manager has not booked you and brought in for you X dollars, so it's $20,000 for the year or $100,000, whatever you put in. If they don't meet that minimum goal, the agreement is terminated. And you have the same, but if they do meet the goal, then it goes into the second year, and the second year can have additional higher level of requirements. So you get into that contract. Now, also important, let me go to the end of the agreement, and there's a lot in between. You also want to put in a clause that clarifies how the agreement will be settled on termination. In other words, if you're going to end the agreement after year 2 or 5 years of the 5-year contract, you don't want to have fights. You don't want to spend a lot of money with lawyers. So if you have it spelled out very clearly what the manager owes you, what you owe the manager, in a clause, and I know you don't want to think about terminating, you don't want to think on the negative side, but it's very smart to put in the clause as to what are the conditions for termination of your agreement. And if you're a single artist, that's one thing. If you're a band, whether it's a jazz band or a rock and roll band, now you're talking about several people signing between themselves and with the manager. And it gets a little bit more complicated. So you want to make it very clear what happens if any one or more of the members of the group leave. That has to be in there. Now, should the manager just receive remuneration as 15% or 20% for gigs, for performances signed up? Or should it include royalties from recordings? These are all negotiable. Now, if you're dealing with a manager who has some track record, he or she is going to ask for more things in his or her favor rather than yours. It's all a question of negotiating and who has the leverage, the power in this negotiating. But for sure, you should have some personal management lined up because it's a complex business. And yes, you're a musician or a singer, but you have to think of yourself as much more than that. You are a brand, you're a commodity, and that you should be. And you have to identify what are your unique qualities that people would want to hire you, whether it's to sing with one of the opera companies, large or small, for a single performance or for an annual contract, whatever. But all these things are important. You've got to ask yourself, what's unique? If you're an opera singer, am I short, tall? Am I obese? What are they looking for? What's the image? Am I a soprano or mezzo soprano? And again, if you're in a band, like what is unique about your particular group? You have to be ready to answer that kind of question.
Do you think everybody that is considered a serious artist should get management, or that's something that just comes along?
At some point in your career, absolutely. But it may not be when you first graduate from school, university, conservatory. You're just starting out. It's going to be very challenging if you did want to get a manager to get somebody to sign you. They're going to say, well, who are you? What have you done? Okay. Do you have any demos? Audio? How about video? They want to see you. I suggest that if you're in the classical field, that you might want to contact Music Biz Academy or Musical Chairs, Stage Pool, Vocalist, the AGMA, the American Guild of Musical Artists. They all have people on staff to guide people who are starting out in the business as performers, musicians, singers. And I suggest strongly that you contact any one of these organizations. Also, there's Opera Musica, Hello Stage, and YAP Tracker, Y-A-P, YAP Tracker, that all have resources in-house to help people who are starting out as musicians and singers.
What do you think about the practice of some management companies where they charge actually for auditions, or they charge for a monthly fee to represent you even if you don't get any jobs?
No, that they're unethical. I would walk away. I would run away from people like that. Managers do not charge. Managers work. A manager is an employee of the performer and earns their keep by bringing in remuneration from performances, and that's it. So if an artist is earning $1,000 for an opera and they're doing 200 a year, they're earning $200,000 a year. That's nice. The manager will make 15% of $200,000. That's not going to be able to make much of a living with an artist like that. Because the artist is making most of it, 85%. So it's really up to the artist to build up a remuneration base before even going to look for an artist manager.
I guess that's where this type of manager comes when they know they're not going to get enough money, so they say, well, let's take all the new people and charge them, I don't know, $500 a month, and then I can make some money that way. I mean, I'm trying to
now, if somebody is a manager and also a lawyer, and there are a few of these around, there's a question as to whether it's ethical to be both an entertainment lawyer, specializing in entertainment law, knowing all about publishing and contracts and copyright. But let's say an artist goes to an entertainment lawyer. The lawyer will charge a fee, an hourly rate. That's normal. $200 an hour, whatever it is, that's legit. But if that person is acting as a manager, it's unethical to say, pay me so much money for advice. That's not the way managers work. Managers work on a percentage of what they bring in to the pool for the artist, whether it's a band of 5 musicians or a single person.
So potentially looking at career of a manager, like it could be quite difficult for them to make money also, when you think that, I mean, how many artists are bringing home $1 million a year,
What this is that's the point. If the musician's bringing in $1 million a year, the manager's just going to make 150,000 or 200,000.
That's good, but I mean, it's not crazy.
And I can name a couple of managers that are in this category where they're bringing in 10, 20, 30, 40 million dollars for an artist. And I know a lot of startup musicians that would love to be managed by this person, But why would he start up with, why would he take on somebody who is making $50,000 or $100,000 a year? What's he going to make on 50,000? He's going to make $7,000-8,000. He's making tens of millions of dollars with the artists that are bringing in 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollars a year. He's not going to waste his time with this new artist unless, and it happens rarely, that he says, this is the next big artist. I want to sign this person up, even though they're not making any money yet. But that is very, very rare. Don't forget, there are approximately 100,000 commercially available recordings produced every year. 100,000 just in the pop music field, 100,000 recordings. And radio and other sources can't play 100,000. They can't even play 2,000. And record companies are always trying to get their established artists, whether it's a Lady Gaga or Barbara Streisand or Kanye West, they want the local, the artists that they've got signed up to get their next record, promoted wherever, through streaming, television, radio, whatever. So what is your chance of you coming out with a recording at your expense or somebody else who's invested in it and getting it to take off, so to speak, commercially? Very, very small. And I don't want to frighten any musicians and singers. I don't want to be negative, but I have to talk reality, and that is the reality. Today, everybody has their own recording studio. What used to cost $500,000, you can get that kind of sound in your own home by going to a store and putting in your little home recording studio. And there's so many hundreds of thousands of people that are now making their own recordings and putting them out. They're all competing one against the other. So on the plus side, you don't have to rely on one of 3 or 4 major record companies to put your record out. You could put it out on your own. But on the negative side, it's not like in the old days when there were few artists out there. Today, there are millions of people who all think that they are the next great Luciano Pavarotti or a Barbara Streisand or a Kanye West, whatever field you want. And it's very competitive. It's highly competitive.
And I guess now from the point of view of recording studios, it's getting thin too, because I mean, what's the point for an artist to spend money there if they can do it at home? Or is there still a place for the recording studio?
Well, that's a whole other story. There are still a lot of recordings, big major recording studios with big, what are called full line consoles with 60 or 100 channels, and it costs $250,000. And one of my graduates actually made his career not as a recording engineer, but as a studio designer. And to this day, decades later, he's making an amazing living just designing recording studios. Not the little ones for the home where you walk out of the store and put the equipment together and it's all done. I'm talking about major recording studios. They're still happening, but it's true that the major artists today, the ones that have made tens of millions of dollars, don't even have to go to rent these big recording studios. They have their own studio, major, in their own residences, their homes. That's one thing. But a lot of the recording studios that are what are called home studios have some limitations. Generally speaking, most people that start up with that equipment don't realize that the room acoustics are important. And they don't spend any time, energy, or money on the acoustics. So what they end up doing is doing the recording in their home and then taking the recording to a major studio with great sound and a lot of outboard gear and master it or fix up, modify the sound using this fantastic equipment and just using a limited amount of time in mixing rather than bringing the whole band into that big studio. They're doing it at home. But when it comes to pop music, especially the vocalists, they're very close to the microphone. So the sound of the room itself is not that important because 90% of the sound is going right into the mic and 10% bounces off the walls. So it doesn't matter if the walls are echoey or not. But if you're recording classical music, opera singers, they're rarely 3 to 6 inches away from the microphone. Traditionally, they could be 3 feet, could be 6 feet away. In a concert hall, even more. But even in a professional recording studio, because of the tremendous volume, the sound output of an opera singer, they're always further away from the mic. Now, what does this mean in terms of recording at a home studio? Now the ratio of the direct sound to the reverberant sound that's bouncing off the walls and coming back into the mic is a lot higher. There's a lot of reverb. So it's important to have good room acoustics, not just equipment. But ultimately, it all boils down to music first. My colleague passed away just a few months ago, recently, Bruce Swedien, always said, music first. The knobs and buttons are secondary. And because of that way of thinking, he was able to carve out a career over half a century, from when it was one microphone and mono to stereo. And he recorded Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Sarah Vaughan, Barbra Streisand, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, and of course the Jennifer Lopez. And the recording that he's best known for is Thriller, all of Michael Jackson's hits, and a lot of motion picture soundtracks. But he always felt that he was successful because it wasn't the knobs, it was music first. Whether it was to pick up the sound of the musical instruments and produce something that was absolutely innovative, creative, and astounding.
Well, when you say music first, it's the performance. That's what you mean.
It's the performance, and it's the recording engineer's job to think music first, to think of how do I pick up that sound from the artist without initially modifying it to something crazy because I have some crazy idea in my mind of equalizing or compressing. Again, the great recording engineers, the George Martins, the Tom Dowds, Phil Ramones, Bruce Swediens, always think music comes first. And the technology is a tool. It's like, if I handed you a pen and a piece of paper and said, could you create a great poem or a great novel? I'll show you how to work a pen. Here's how you hold the pen. Well, it's the same with, I could show you how to work recording equipment, but it's not the equipment per se. Yes, the equipment is a tool, it's an instrument, but it's not the beginning and the end all of it. It starts with an understanding and a background in music. It doesn't mean that you have to be a good musician to be a recording engineer. In fact, I remember Bruce Swedien telling me more than once that his musical chops were not that great, but he had an amazing ear for the music when somebody is performing it. And he would spend hours and hours just to get a particular sound to sound a certain way. His career started with recording the big bands, the Duke Ellingtons, even the Chicago Symphony. And he said, that's kind of boring because all you're doing is setting up the microphones and making a recording such that it will sound in the control room and eventually in people's homes, in their living room, the way people think that the Chicago Symphony or what have you would sound if you were in the concert hall listening to it live.
Yeah.
And he said, that's fun, but it's a lot more challenging to do something creative with the sound, which was what Bruce Swedien would have done with Michael Jackson and the opening bars, the opening sound from Billie Jean. It took him a couple of days just to get that sound, which is unique. It's like, if I can give you using an analogy, if somebody wants to take an image of a model, a portrait, they can take a camera and shoot it, and now you've got a picture of that person, or you can do a painting of that person. Well, the great recording engineers don't take a camera and shoot the image direct. They're painting. In fact, that's what Bruce Swedien is doing. He's creating oral, A-U-R-A-L, oral images, and using some.
Wouldn't that contradict what you just said about the music is first? If the music is first, you want to be as in original form as it sounds. If you start influencing by moving the knobs, then it seems to me that it's knobs first in that kind of thing.
Well, what happened that, went into the 60s and 70s when the Beatles came out, they started coming out with sounds that would be very difficult to reproduce on stage. There was so much like playing a track backwards, adding a lot of effects. So what happened in the industry as far as live performance, you started to see these bands putting on concerts in arenas, and they brought their own console, live sound consoles with all of the sound effects that you could imagine you'd have in the recording studio, so that they could replicate that sound in front of 15,000 people in the arena. But originally with the first recording artists, when they started doing performances, you'd say, gee, it doesn't sound like their record. Well, because they just came with very basic sound system, live sound system, without all of the effects that were on the recording. But once the recording technology got more and more complex with compressors, equalizers, and all kinds of other digital signal processing devices, the artists wanted to have these for their live performances as well, for obvious reasons. Now, in many cases, the artists who were in the studio, this is kind of funny, use the Beach Boys as an example. A lot of people don't realize that on the recordings of the Beach Boys, they weren't all playing themselves. They hired outside musicians who were better musicians than the Beach Boys. But who cares? When they went on stage, it was the Beach Boys, the ones that we know. And there are quite a few other groups that had the same kind of situation.
Yeah, I don't know if
a group of musicians called the Wrecking Crew, that the late Phil Spector, who just passed away, Phil Spector would bring in this group of musicians, and they were always the same guys, and they were eventually known as the Wrecking Crew. They were the backup for a lot of the big records that he did, including You've Lost That Loving Feeling, Unchained Melody, and all the Ronettes records and the Crystals. And of course, he's best known for the Wall of Sound. And I remember having him as a keynote speaker at our colleges, and he would say that he's not a great music. He says the great musicians, the great composers were in the pop field, Irving Berlin, George Gershwin. But he had this idea of coming up with this wall of sound, which is unique, But that gets into more of the recording technology stuff.
Then what does that mean? What is that? What is the wall of sound?
Remember, the wall of sound, when he was making his first recordings, the industry was still distributing records in monaural. He always called himself Mr. Mono, always mono, but eventually he did his records in stereo. Why did he do them in mono? And even when stereo came out initially, he didn't want to do it in stereo. He says, I'm a control freak. We know that's his reputation. So I don't want people at home twisting the knob from panning left and right. I want them to hear it the way I heard it, the way I made it. So mono is it. That was one reason. But eventually he did give in and went into stereo. Another interesting story is that when Bruce Swedien was recording Duke Ellington at the Universal Studios in Chicago, all the recordings were done in mono. But stereo was coming out. And Bruce knew that stereo was going to be the thing of the future. He tried to convince the record executives to put in a second tape recorder while they were recording the Duke Ellington and the band. And they said, we don't want to spend an extra, $15 or $20 on another roll of tape to do it in stereo. It's ridiculous. It's a waste of money. So Bruce brought in his own tape machine, a stereo machine, and recorded in stereo. Never got it released as such, but he said, if you ever listen to the stereo version versus the mono, wow, what a difference. And of course, there's so many different stereo recording techniques. So we start getting into mic recording techniques. Mm-hmm. There's the AB, which is taking two identical microphones and placing them a couple of feet apart, maybe 10 feet apart, depending on how much stereo spread you want. The next technique would be the XY, which is a coincident microphone technique where you have two microphones with the capsules, directional microphones, just about touching each other in the shape of a X, XY, and between 90 and 130 degrees apart. And it's a different technique. And then you have the ORTF technique, which is stands for the Organisation Radiotéléphonique de France. It's the French broadcasting systems technique, which is very, very specific. The microphone pairs are 110 degrees apart, not less, not more, and something like 17 centimeters apart from each other. Then you get into the Bloomline technique. And lastly, the MS, mid-side technique, which uses two microphones. One is directional or omnidirectional, the other one is bidirectional. I'm not going to get into the details because that could take a few hours just to explain the details of that technique. But there are various techniques, and you just have to play around with the different equipment and see what works out best for you as a musician and singer if you're doing this in your own home or at somebody's home studio. Experiment. If you have the option and the choice of having 3 or 4 microphones in your studio, put all the microphones up and do a short test with each one and just decide which one sounds better. There's no such thing as what is the best microphone. It's what is the best microphone for a particular application. I remember once when I was at the Beltone recording studios for a couple of years, and we had this country artist come in, Montana Slim, and he was an RCA artist, and he always recorded with this RCA 77 microphone. He didn't record at the RCA studios. He loved working at Beltone. Once a year he would come in, and this was my opportunity after being at the studio for a year to record Montana Slim. The microphone was set up by the other engineer the night before, and it was the RCA 77. And the stool that he always used, the stool was set up for him to sit on. And I come in the morning to do this particular session, and I'm removing the microphone, the RCA 77DX, and I'm putting up a Neumann mic. Today they cost $15,000 or $20,000 for a Neumann U47, but we had, even back then, they were $5,000. It's a great microphone for sure. And I, in my naivete, thought, well, that's the best microphone we have in the studio. So I'm putting that microphone on the stand, taking off the RCA. And the owner, Les Cahan, walks in. He says, "What are you doing, David?" I said, "I'm changing the microphone to this U47. I mean, it's got a better transient response. It's a condenser." And I'm going into all the technical. He says,
Yeah.
"David, just quiet. Don't say another word. If you say another word, I'll ask you to leave the studio permanently." This is the mic that he's been turning out hits for years, selling loads of records for RCA. Maybe it's because it's an RCA mic. It has the letters RCA on it. But he said, "This is the mic, put it back on, and I don't want to hear anymore." So I learned something, that the best mic is whatever is the best mic for a particular situation. There's no such thing as the best. I could say which is the most expensive, but not necessarily the best for any application.
But are not like many, at least the mics that are available now on commercially, when you get around the 500 price range, is it not like there's some mistake about mics too, I guess, and sometimes we try to maybe put too much weight on the mic, because I mean there's so many other equipment and like you're saying, and what for too, that.
Well, you could put your money into many other things like outboard equipment and reverse. If you have a limited budget, you don't want to blow half of it just on a microphone. Yes, you need one good mic, but we used to have to pay thousands of dollars for a condenser microphone, even if it's not a Neumann U47. I am speaking to you right now, not through the microphone on my built into my MacBook computer, but on a microphone that's got its own shock absorber and it's got a little tripod. And I got it last week. I think I paid $50. It's unheard of, 10 years ago, to be able to have a good quality condenser microphone for that limited amount of money.
Yeah.
But that is possible. Now, some of the greatest recordings in classical music that were ever made were by Mercury record label, Mercury Recordings, at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. And I have the whole series of them, and they are phenomenal. Initially, they were done in mono with one mic. They spent an enormous amount of time to find what they call the aural, A-U-R-A-L, the aural center. And that one mic alone picked up the whole orchestra. And then they came out with stereo, and they came out with two microphones, nothing else. And the quality of these recordings were absolutely incredible. In fact, there was a recording engineer who wrote a book, the Recording Studio Handbook, John Warham, used in a lot of schools. And John Warham gave a lecture, a demonstration, to the professional engineers at the annual conference of the Audio Engineering Society a couple of decades ago. And he played a Beethoven symphony that he engineered in the mid-1950s. And then he played a bit of the same symphony that he recorded a decade or more later, using multi-track recording, multiple recordings, multiple microphones. And he didn't tell the audience which was which, the 1950s or the 1960s version. He asked the question of the 300 professional recording engineers in the audience. Please raise your hand when I ask you this question. Which recording did you like better? The first one that I played or the second one? He didn't say which was, whether he played the first one was the 50s or the 60s. And it was unanimous. everybody's hands went up for the recording that was recorded in the earlier years, not the more recent one with better technology, if you want to call it better technology. So it's not technology so much as technique and knowing your microphone placement. How do you learn about microphone placement? Yes, you can read. There are many books that are out there now, but a lot of it is just like they say, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Let's practice with those microphones. Practice, practice. And eventually you'll find that you'll learn. You'll learn that way.
I actually had a question about all this. I'll come back later, I guess, to that about the role of producer in all this, because you have in the studio you have the sound engineer, but then what's the producer in all this? Where you situate him, and what's really his job? Because it's become something like everybody is a producer. Oh, I'm a big kind of name to throw around, but nobody really knows what it means in some cases.
Let me explain it very quickly. The role of the recording engineer, who likes to think of himself or herself, well, there are very few herselfs around, but himself, he likes to think of himself as the the person in control, sitting at the center of the console, the person responsible for the sound. Well, yes and no. The audio engineer is responsible for answering the question, how do I get the sound that the producer wants? The role of the producer is to ask the question and answer the question, what kind of sound am I looking for? So it's the producer ultimately that says, what sound am I looking for? Engineer, get it. When Quincy Jones and Bruce Swedien worked together, Quincy Jones producer, Bruce Swedien recording engineer, I said, how do you two guys communicate? He said, we communicate with colors. We both have synesthesia, which is, people who can hear with their eyes, see with their ears, feel with, different. And he says, when Quincy wants the sound a little hotter or brighter, he doesn't use technical terms or words. He would say, Bruce, I want a little more purple. I want a more orange sound. I want a red sound. They understand each other with those words. The reason that I started the College Trebas Institute was to develop a language of communication between the engineer and the producer. Now, back in the 50s, 60s, even 70s, the engineer was the guy that answered the question, sat at the console, how do I get the sound the producer wants? The producer was another individual, the George Martin, right? Not the engineer, the Jeff Emmerich for the Beatles, but George Martin, the producer. This is the sound I'm looking for. Over the last several years, things changed radically. The engineer is also the producer. I'm not talking about classical recording for symphony or operas. I'm talking about pop, rock and roll, maybe some jazz. Basically, the engineer said it was for practical reasons and for economic reasons as well. The engineer said, I earn a salary, an annual salary, $20,000 a year, or $25 an hour if I'm on the hourly basis, and that's it. And that's how Tom Dowd and Phil Ramone started out. Tom Dowd as the engineer for Patti LaBelle, Rod Stewart, Ray Charles, and I can go on and on and on, and making a nice salary. But he said, that's not where the real money and creative control is. So he walked out from the studio, signs up the artist to himself, whether it's a Rod Stewart or whatever. Now he's a producer. He comes back in the studio, pays for the studio time, but now he's making 10% of what the artist is making. So the artist is making $50 million. He's making $5 million instead of a measly little salary. And this happened with quite a few of the same with Phil Ramone, had his phenomenal recording studio called A&R Studios in New York. It's a big mystery how he got the sound, but he had a sound of the strings, the violins, that couldn't be reproduced or anywhere else. Artists would record everywhere in the world, but when it came to doing the strings, they rent out the A&R Studios. And some of the artists that Phil Ramone had at his in our studio included James Taylor, Simon and Garfunkel, Barbra Streisand. And eventually he decided he's not going to just be the engineer. I mean, that's one thing, it's limited. He's going to be the producer as well. So you don't hear people going from producing to engineering, but you hear very often they start as an engineer and they go into producing. They say, hey, I can make more money as a producer as well. And do they have that talent to be a producer? Well, there's a number of kinds of producer. There's executive producer, which means the person who goes into the studio with the money, pays for the bills, and sits back and says, geez, I don't quite like that sound. So the engineers, well, what do you want me to do? Try something different. And that's not very helpful. Then you've got the creative producer, the one who gets involved with arranging and orchestration of the musicians, and depending on the degree of talent the person has, you know. And then of course you have what we call the non-producer. The guy doesn't know anything about it, but he calls himself producer because he found the band or the musicians. So yeah, today you find, especially with all these home studios, the person who is making the record is the recording engineer and the producer.
Mm. And I was going to ask you a question actually, that just remember about the stereo. So we're talking about the mono, then stereo. Then I mean you've been kind of a visionary through all this recording history course that we're following through the day and in your career. And I wanted to know what's your opinion on what's the next thing. So you have a stereo. What can you envision as the next type of sound that could be there for mass consumption?
Sennheiser just came out the last year or two. It's a couple of years now that I was in San Francisco at the Sennheiser store. They have a demo room there, and they came up with this 3D, not stereo, but 3D microphone.
Okay.
3D microphone for 3D, whether it's for audio for game design, or what have you. Now, we can talk about multi-channel recording, which is going on now for many decades, but multi-channel in the home, whether it's 5.1, right? It went from stereo to 5.1, 7.1. One of the problems with that is the people that design the recording are not in your home. If you haven't set up your system properly, you're not really able to listen to the sound the way it was designed to be. Now, was multi-channel audio something that is relatively new where you have? No, because in 1923, I think it was around 1923, Bell Laboratories in the United States set up I won't say a recording, but they set up a live performance. They had an orchestra, I think it was in Carnegie Hall, with 15 or 20 microphones in front of all the various instruments. And they had another orchestra in Washington, D.C. in a concert hall with 15 or 20 loudspeakers connected through to each of the microphones that were in New York. And the audience thought that they were hearing the symphony playing live, but they weren't playing in Washington. They heard the sound of almost each instrument, the symphony, through all these loudspeakers, transmitted from New York to Washington with special lines. So this multi-channel experience, we're not talking about 5 channels, we're talking about dozens, goes way back to the 1920s. But is that going to happen in the home? Well, you might have a few people that have the budget to build a 10-channel, 12-channel audio. I was at a demonstration of the Audio Engineering Society several years ago here in Montreal. They came in from NHK Broadcasting in Japan, and they were putting on a demo of I think it was 10 or 12 channels. The sounds for the celestial sounds in the sky, the earthy sounds, and then the sounds of the water below. And they had all these speakers set up above, below, and around you, left, right, top, front, and so on. Terrific, great. But how practical is that? You know? Now, the Audio Engineering Society, Toronto chapter, next week on, I think it's the January 26th, 7 p.m., are having a microphone technique evening workshop from some of the top people talking about all kinds of miking techniques. Now, for those of you that are seeing and hearing this presentation live, of course, you can go to this AES meeting. If you are picking this up later, maybe you can get a recorded version of it, but I think it's a worthwhile thing to attend. There'll be some very interesting questions. In fact, they will be answering the questions that you have been asking me. What's happening in the future? You know, where are things going technologically, microphone-wise? It's the Audio Engineering Society.
Yeah.
The Toronto. Go to aes.org, and you'll see the meeting referred to of next week.
Next week.
And it's all about microphone recording techniques. I just got the notice of this a couple of days ago.
So going back to your 3D mic, like how is that different? Like, because I mean, I can imagine like omnidirectional type of mic. What else can you pick after that? I'm trying to understand the concept.
When you use a directional mic versus an omnidirectional, well, it depends on the technique that you're recording. If you're doing a mono with a single voice, you're going to use one mic. It probably will be a directional mic or directional pattern. Some microphones have multiple patterns. You can, with a switch, flick from omni to unidirectional and possibly even bidirectional.
Yeah.
It depends. If you're recording an orchestra, you might use many microphones, or maybe use one omni mic if you're doing it in mono, or in stereo, 2 omnis. But if you're recording just one instrument or one voice, you'll probably record it with a directional, but maybe omni works better depending on the situation.
Yeah.
Again, experiment, try it out.
But then you were talking about the 3D mic by Sennheiser, and how is that different from a omni? Like I don't.
Well, it gives you a 3-dimensional image, as opposed to now. What is stereo? Stereo allows you. Well, let's start. Mono comes through one speaker or 2 speakers in your home living room, but with the sound appearing sonically to come from the center, whether you have one speaker or a left and a right. If it's recorded properly, everything in phase, it sounds from the center. Now you have 2 microphones or more, you're recording in stereo, and when you're playing that back in your home, the sound of the orchestra seems to come from left, center, right, and if it's recorded really creatively, it will sound to come from even beyond the left speaker and beyond the right speaker, over your head and behind you, even with only 2 speakers. It is possible. Now, who records a voice with more than one microphone? Usually you do it with one mic because it's one person, one source. But again, getting back to Bruce Swedien, the genius recording engineer, he recorded every source, everything in the studio for Michael Jackson, with Thriller and other recordings that he did. He recorded even the voice in stereo. Now, what about the sound coming out of a guitar amplifier? That's a single source, single speaker. Well, he would put microphones a distance away from the sound source, from the amplifier, the guitar amp, and pick up the sound bouncing off all the walls in the room to get a real stereo effect from that one single source. Now, how was he able to do this with every source, whether it's the saxophones and all the other instruments, he didn't have one 24-track tape machine. He had three 24-track, this is before digital, he'd have three 24-track machines locked together for a total of 3 times, well, 23, because one track on each machine was for synchronizing. And he would have these 60-odd channels. Each sound source was in stereo. That's why the sound of a recording that's done by this genius engineer was absolutely spectacular. But with a lot of the current pop engineers and microphone recording techniques, it's done with one instrument, and each instrument very closely mic'd, without giving you that room effect, that spatial effect. Oh, you can get the spatial effect by adding reverb, but that's artificial. It's not the same thing as time difference and frequency differences between the microphones.
Well, some even advocate that, to your point, some even advocate like you have to record in a very quiet room where there's no reverb at all for the recording to be good. But I mean, I guess it's another aesthetic. Well, I don't know.
Well, that's another interesting point. Musicians like to play in a live room, because if you're sitting in that room for 3, 4, 5 hours and it's dead, it's almost like an anechoic chamber. You don't hear the sound coming back to you. You don't hear other musicians. Of course, you have headphones, you can hear it that way, but they like to play with and hearing a little liveness to it. In fact, they would even like to have reverb added into their headphones, hearing their instrument or whatever they want to hear, even though the reverb is not going on to tape, because once you have reverb on, if you don't like it later, you can't take it out. So we usually record dry and add the reverb later. But for the listening purposes, for the musicians, they want to hear it, you add some reverb to them. But the studio engineer prefers a dead room. So you're right. When you design the room, again, you design the room, is it a dead sounding room so the sound doesn't leak all over the place, so the engineer doesn't have control? Not necessarily. Some of the more sophisticated recording studios have variable acoustics, like concert halls. You have panels on the side walls that are movable, and the absorptive cloth side of the panels deaden the sound of the room if you have these all the way around the room. And if you flip, they're on hinges, if you flip these wall panels around, the other side might be a shiny wood, which will change the natural reverb time in the recording studio substantially. Another approach is some of the larger studios have live end, dead end. In fact, that was a acoustical studio design technique started many years ago by one of the studio designers in LA, Westlake Audio. You'd have one end of the studio live end and the other end dead end. So depending on the producer on a particular session, he could tell the musicians to sit at the live end or the dead end.
And actually, there's questions coming to me as I talk to you. So at one point in your career, but going back to all your career, you decided to start doing education and found your school, Trebas. But before that, I mean, you could have become a producer in one point, or just an engineer. Was that in the cards, or like why did you decide to go all of a sudden for a educational program?
Well, when I was in New York, I realized back in 64 and 65 that the quality of recorded music in Canada, Montreal and Toronto in particular, whether it was the French recording industry or the Anglophone production, it was like 10 or 15 years behind what was happening in New York. Technologically, no, Montreal had so many multi-track recording, professional recording studios in Montreal, but they didn't have the personnel, with one or two exceptions. Most of them didn't have the personnel to create great sounding recordings. So I learned a lot in New York from a production point of view, engineering point of view, management, and the whole music scene. So when I came back to Canada after working at the studio that I set up, their multi-track facility, and after the World's Fair stuff at 67, I got a position with an aerospace company with over 5,000 employees in Montreal. And I was managing the training services department. I found this so fascinating in a sense. Why? Because when I went to school, I went to university, high school, college, university, everything was theory, large classes, write an essay, theory, exams. Here I am now at this aerospace technology company, and I'm putting on training courses, 1-day courses, 1-week courses in goal setting, time management, managerial courses for management for the 750 managers at this aerospace company. And it was fascinating. But one day I said to myself, what in the world am I doing in this jet engine manufacturing company? I really love the music business. Wow. If I could set up a practical training program, not university theory, but a practical hands-on training program like what I was doing at Pratt & Whitney, this would be amazing. So I left the aerospace company and sat on my dining room table at home for better part of a year with 3x5 cards. And on each card, I just put a word: acoustics, copyright, songwriting, arranging, orchestration, design, marketing, publishing, recording. And each card had a word. And then for each card, I developed a curriculum, a whole course on my dining room table. And I decided, now I have the curriculum. I have 80 courses. They fall into three faculties. Some are technological, some are creative, producing and songwriting and arranging, orchestration, and some of them are business, marketing, copyright law, and so on. So I said, oh, now I'm going to start a school, and I've got 3 faculties. My wife said, I think you've lost all your faculties. Anyway, I put this whole thing together, and I put an ad in some trade papers. I needed some instructors. Somebody saw this ad in the Canadian magazine, the music magazine, RPM at the time, in England. And he wrote to me, he said, I'm coming to Canada and I'd love to teach at your school, your new school you're starting. So he comes over to the house. And I said, so what's your background? He says, well, I've recorded quite a few things. I said, have you got any examples? He said, well, do you have a tape machine? I said, so I'd take his tape, put it on my tape machine. And I listened to this record. It's Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty. It becomes a monster hit. I said, you recorded this? He says, yeah, it's going to come out one of these days soon. I said, that's going to be a big hit. Anyway, I said, you are an amazing recording engineer. He said, well, that's what I learned in London, England. Brought him on board. Then I heard of another recording engineer. He worked in New York with Phil Ramone at the A&R studios. I guess he got fed up with the lifestyle in New York. He moved to Montreal, and I found him at a recording studio, a small recording studio that mainly does radio and television jingles, music commercials. Yes, yeah. The odd pop band would come in, but the mainstay revenue for this studio was recording commercials, jingles. So he heard about the institute that I just started. He said, I could teach for you. I said, well, what's your background? Well, I recorded Barbra Streisand. I did some work with Simon and Garfunkel, James. I said, whoa, heavyweight. What are you doing in Montreal? So he told me why he came. So I brought him on. So how did the whole thing start? I couldn't do it this way today, but back then it was a lot simpler. I put an ad in the newspaper, and all of a sudden I have 25 applicants. Now, where's the school? I didn't have a school yet. So I had one of these shared offices, and they answer with a generic phone number, and they said, can I help you? Well, we saw this ad. We'd like to speak to the person responsible, the owner. Well, let me take your phone number. We'll have them call you back. So every day I would get my messages, and I see all of a sudden I've got 25 people that are interested in coming to a school. I don't have a school. I just have I'm working out of my dining room table at the house. So I found out that this shared office thing, also you could rent one of their boardrooms for whatever, $25, $100 for the day. So I rented it, called up the 25 people. They came in and they said they're fascinated about this is the first recording, audio engineering, record producing, the first recording arts, music business program in the whole country. It was not like today, there's quite a lot of them. So they said, we'd like to, we want to get into this business, but we've got to learn, we could actually learn recording. And so I said, yes. Where's the school? I said, oh, well, it's just under construction. I can't have you coming now, but as soon as it's ready, I'll let you know. Now I said, you know what? I was hoping this thing would work, but I didn't know if it would or not. I didn't have a school. Now I better find a location. So I go downtown Montreal and I see a sign for electronic course. I go into the school. It wasn't doing that well. I had a few students in one. I had like 3 or 4 classrooms, but hardly any students. I said, I'd be interested in, and what are you teaching? He said, well, I teach electronics. I said, oh, well, I'm not teaching electronics. I'm teaching more the recording and the business of music and so on. Not competitive. Well, would you like to share the expenses here? You know, I have the receptionist. You can have all the classrooms in the morning. I'll take them in the afternoon. You just pay half the rent. And I said, wow, I didn't have to build classrooms and buy furniture, chalkboards, sound. I'm ready to go. I called my 25 people and I said, it didn't start in September. We started in November, a little late, first year. Next year, quadrupled the enrollment with the superstar engineers and staff that I had teaching, although I was teaching some courses as well, communications and some audio, and the music business course. And it just went on and on and on. And after 10, 15, 20 years, opened up multiple campuses. And of course, having sold my interest in the colleges, now I have a lot of time to do other things, like writing my memoir. So I'm writing my book, which will come out as soon as I get it finished, on my life in the music, my life in general, and my career in the music industry, and then into education.
Oh, great. Do you have a publisher already?
No, not yet.
Because we're studying actually possibility at La Scena of beginning to publish books also. So I mean, call us for that when you think it's getting ready. It's funny that you mentioned this because we were talking just a few weeks ago, like what are some of the books that we could work in. And
my book will have a lot of very interesting photos, some of which I sent you. I don't know if you're going to use them on this particular podcast, but they're photos with me and the Beatles.
Yeah,
it's kind of rare. I spent a whole day, by the way. That's another whole story back.
Wait a second for that. I'm gonna try to share as as you're speaking. Oh, okay. So do you see it there?
That's René Angelil,
Yeah.
the late husband and personal manager of Celine Dion, who sent his son to our music business program to learn the business, artist management.
So René himself, he didn't study there himself.
Well, he was a singer in a French speaking in a French group called Les Baronnets. There were three guys, and they would do French cover versions of a lot of American hit records back in the late 50s and the 60s. Don't forget, back then you had the Four Lads, the Four Aces, a lot of groups, and he was one of the three guys. And when he discovered this young kid, 10 or 12 years old, called Celine Dion, he quit them, and they were like the number one group in the province of Quebec in the French recording industry.
So they were
very big. He quit and he
okay.
says, I got to manage this girl. I know I can turn her into something really big. She's a very talented kid. So here the picture is with René as a key lecturer at our graduation ceremony at one of the hotels in Montreal. That was back in the 90, I guess around 1985, something like that.
Did you know if he had some producing capabilities too? Like, was he just managing Celine Dion, or he
strict? Oh no. He hired the best producers and engineers, whether it was a David Foster or there were various. Aldo Nova did a few hits for him, for Celine, and I had a very dear friend of mine, Ben Kay, used to manage René Angelil when he was the singer in the Les Baronnets, and afterwards, René Angelil asked Ben Kay to run the music publishing division for Celine Dion. Even though she didn't write her own songs, she had some interest in the publishing side of things. So Ben Kay was responsible for picking a lot of the songs for Celine to sing. It was a talent, a very great talent that Ben Kay had. And Ben Kay and I go way back to the time when at university, Concordia University, before it was called Concordia, it was called Sir George Williams University. At Concordia, I produced the Winter Carnival variety show. And Ben Kay was a student at the university as well. And I had various acts in the variety show. And one day, just before the show goes on, I hear that one of the acts, a dancer, because all the acts in the show had to be, there was a limited budget. I didn't have millions of dollars, right? It was like a Broadway show, a budget of $1,500 to put on the annual show. So I had this dancer for one of the acts, and she broke her leg skiing. So I called up Ben. I said, you're manager, you know so many people in the industry. I need somebody to cover for that. It's just, oh, here, call this girl up. I said, should I audition her? Oh, that would be an insult. Just call her, tell her what time to be there, and she'll be on stage and she'll do the dance number, the dance routine. And the student pianist would play the background. Anyway, the show is on. And by the way, originally my budget was $1,500. I said, how can you produce a show for $50? I want somebody like Paul Anka, or folk music was very big. How about Peter, Paul, and Mary? Well, they wanted $20,000 for the evening. I said, well, no, that's 10 times my budget. Well, maybe I could get Milton Berle. Are you kidding? Milton Berle, I mean, he's got this 20-year contract with NBC. He's like Mr. Television. I mean, people would buy TV sets back in the 50s just so they could see his show. There's no way you're going to get him. I called Frank Burrow, his manager in New York, and I said, I'd like him to just come on stage to crown the to announce the princesses of each of the faculties and to crown the Winter Carnival queen. Just make the announcement. So he said, let me speak to Uncle Milty. He calls me back a week later. my staff said, "You're not going to get Milton Berle." He calls me back, Frank Burley says, "We'll do it. Just pick him up at the airport." I said, "We have to discuss one other thing. How much money does he want for doing this?" He said, "We'll do it free. Just pick him up at the airport and bring him in." So I produced this Milton Berle show. But anyway, back to the dancer. The dancer, my stage manager here, I'm producing the show. The stage manager says, "David, we got a problem. You know, we've got the chancellor of the university sitting in the audience with all the students and, you know, the theater. We're going to be thrown out of the university by Monday morning." I said, "What are you talking about?" "Well, this girl, the dancer, she doesn't have a costume." "Well, she sort of has a costume, but very little, like tassels." I said, so the MC announces her. She comes on, curtain goes up. My stage manager says, "Bring the curtain down." I said, "No, the act it's going on." She comes on, she starts doing her dance number. And the audience, the guys, of course, they're laughing. It's winter carnival time. And I said, "What's going on?" The dancer is like 250 pounds. I said to Ben the next day, I said, "Ben, you said you got a ballet dancer for me." He said, "I didn't say ballet dancer. I said, I've got a belly dancer for you." I said, "At 250 pounds," is, "Well, I haven't seen her for 10 years. And she had these tassels." It turned out to be a real comedy number. But we were not thrown out of the university on Monday,
I
even
hope
though
so.
the chancellor was there in the audience.
Oh,
So that was, yeah, that's my story with Ben Kay, who worked for Renee and for Celine for years. He passed away several years ago.
So I wanna move here with the pictures, so people can see a little bit and know a little bit about them before we have to leave. So
You've got a picture with, there we go.
Yes.
This is London Records. On the far left of the photograph is Hal Ross, who was the marketing promotion manager for London Records. Right next to him is the late Alex Sherman, Mr. Records of Canada. He had all the record, not only stores with his name, Sherman Records, but all the, I don't know if it was Kresge's or Kmart, but he ran all the record divisions of all these stores, like about 150 stores across Canada. So he's the guy that I went to with my record, the Beatles Are Coming. And the next guy over from Alex Sherman is the DJ from a French radio station, CGMS, I think it was Michel Desrochers. And next to him, to his left, is Roy Orbison, who he had a big hit at the time called Pretty Woman. And the gal
of pop.
And the gal standing to his left is Joyce Germain, the girl who sang the record, The Beatles Are Coming. And she was the opening act for Roy Orbison. And she was just thrilled when she not only did her song, but in rehearsal, Roy Orbison came with a few of his musicians from the band, but he didn't bring a vocal background group. So to do his stage show, he asked the girl, Joyce and her cousins that were doing the vocals for her, if they would do the vocal background for Roy Orbison on Pretty Woman and a few of his other songs. So she was thrilled. And of course, on her left, that's me. And all this is back in 1964 when Pretty Woman was a big, big hit. So that's that.
And that's where, like,
then there's one with the
What's
picture.
the context of this picture, particularly?
Yeah, and I was managing her, and that's that's what the picture is all about.
But that picture is where, in the studio, in the.
Oh no, that picture was at the concert hall.
At the concert hall.
At the concert hall after before the show went on. As a matter of fact, I remember after the show, people were grabbing me. They said, "Oh, you met Roy Orbison." They were tearing my tie and tearing my clothes off just because I met and I was with Roy Orbison. How did they get Roy Orbison out of the concert hall, out of the arena? They put him in a coffin.
Really? This is real?
And he was gone before any of the people. Well, he was a big star back then, but Pretty
Oh my
Woman
God.
was a big hit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'll keep moving to the picture. When
I don't think I have to tell you who that is. Well,
we don't know
I mean,
where it's not.
that's Lionel Richie. I brought him in for a special workshop together with the annual conference of Canadian Music Week, and he didn't sing, but he certainly gave an amazing talk for an hour about his career and whatever anybody wanted to know in the audience, answering some questions. But he was just a super guy. And I got
How
to
do
tell
you
you,
manage
there are a
like?
lot of people in this business that become from nothing extremely famous,
Mm,
and they're not nice people today. But that's not the case with Lionel Richie. He's one of the nicest people that you could ever meet. Down to earth.
And how do you convince somebody like this to? I mean, you call he just like that. You called their agent, and you just try your cards basically.
You know, you make 10 calls and you get 9 rejections and one comes through. You have to hit them at, you know, sometimes they want to share what they've learned, you know, their experience for years and years and years. So yeah, it happens. Doesn't happen often, but it happens.
Let me move on. So this one is wow.
Well, I mentioned earlier on with you that I did this record, engineered this record called The Beatles Are Coming. So when I went to see the president, Fraser Jameson, and Alice Coury, the VP of London Records, to talk about how my record was doing, we all knew that the Beatles were coming in a couple of months. So I asked for tickets. I'd love to sit, whether it's in the first row or way in the back, just to get in. He said, impossible. Would you mind being backstage? So what happened? They did 2 concerts that day in Montreal. And by the way, you can see the 4 members of the Beatles. I'm in the front with those kind of Buddy Holly glasses. Who's the other person? That's Pierre Lalonde, who was a very famous French-Canadian singer. He had a few records out in the English market in the States. He changed his name to Peter Martin, but he was very well known in the Quebec music scene. And he was part of that the concert. They did two concerts that afternoon, and this picture was taken after one of the concerts, but I was backstage with them.
You look like you're getting in an argument there, or something like that. Do you remember particularly what was happening there?
Well, not when the picture was taken, but being backstage, I remember one thing very, very clearly, that John Lennon said to me. Remember, they were just starting out, and they were a phenomenon, and it was hard for them to even understand how they came to such phenomenal success in such a short period of time to be, as we know them, the Beatles. And he was so, he was appreciative, down to earth, and he put his arm, on my shoulder, and he said, imagine, and he hadn't written the song yet, or at least it hadn't recorded it yet. He said, well, I'll never forget, he said, imagine, David, anything you want, you can achieve in life. So I came up with, years later, when I was giving talks at my college, whether it's a graduation or an open house, I would always say to prospective students and students, remember your ABCs, but backwards, CBA. If your mind can conceive it and you can believe it, you can achieve it. And one other thing I always would end up by saying, remember one word, that the Japanese culture was built on this one concept, one word called Kaizen, Kaizen, Kaizen. to translate that into English, the best I could do is to say that it's the continual pursuit of excellence, or the continual pursuit of perfection. And after World War II, Japan was really devastated. I mean, it was the end of their culture. And they decided that they were going to pick up their britches and make something of themselves. So they came up with this concept called Kaizen. And all the companies we now know, and whether it's Canon, Mitsubishi, and Toyota, all of these Japanese companies are what they are because of Kaizen. Whether it's in the home, the parents talk to their child when they're 4 or 5 years old, remember Kaizen. Whether it's in corporate Japan, industrial Japan, or government, everything is Kaizen. Think in terms of the continual pursuit of perfection. Because when we get students in our college, very often, many of them think that because they're signing up and breathing the air of our professors, and when they graduate, the world is out there just waiting to sign them up. Not necessarily. You've got to work hard, and sometimes they will do assignments in the school that are less than ideal. Of course, you got your A students, your B students, and you also have your D and your F students, your failure students. So I always say, don't wait till you get out there. Oh, but this is just a course. I said, no, Kaizen starts here and now in the school. When you do an assignment, whether it's producing a film or doing an audio production, think of doing it to the best of your ability. And then if you think Kaizen, you'll have a chance of really making it outside. I've had a couple of graduates that were amazing. One of them moved from Montreal to LA, and within a very short period of time, he was managing the music publishing divisions, where all the money is, for Miley Cyrus and Katy Perry. And more recently, he called me and said, I've left that position. I said, that's an amazing job you had. Now I'm working with Madonna's organization. He bought a home in Beverly Hills and he's doing fantastic. And yeah, these are more the exception than the rule, but they're the ones that really apply themselves. They believe in that CBA.
So a question about that actually, since, you mentioned over 20,000 students and very little make it to make that kind of great success. How much do you attribute that to just luck?
No, it's not luck. It's persistence. Too many people, when they graduate from our program and in general, they try for a short period of time, they get rejected, and fear is your worst enemy, the fear of success or the fear of failure. And you've got to deal with it. You've got to deal with rejection, and it's going to happen. And for those that never make it, it's because they didn't stick it out long enough. You have to have the motivation. That's number one. You have to have the natural talent, which you can't teach. Skill you can teach. You can instill it with practice, but talent, either you got it or you ain't got it, and you need that persistence to keep at it. And you also have to network. You have to continually network with people that are in the industry. Hang around if it's in the rock field, hang around the bars and the clubs. And I know with the COVID pandemic right now, the whole industry is upside down. And of course, there's no live performances in big arenas and venues, but it will come back. But it's so important to persevere and not give up. I myself, when I first started, I was doing all these recordings at home with what I call, the term home studio came out decades later, but it was a home studio. And one day I'm at RCA and the chief engineer says, we have a job opening here. I said, what kind of a job? We need a recording engineer. I said, here, making a salary every week, a real recording engineer? Yes, yes. So he said, are you interested? I said, absolutely. He says, come into my office. We'll talk a little bit. And I'll never forget, he asked a number of questions. One of the questions was, what is reverberation time? I said, oh, reverberation is like when you're at a lake and you talk, your voice comes back from the mountain at this, or you're in a church with a live sound, it sounds like you're in a bigger delay. He said, David, cut the crap. Reverberation time is the time it takes for sound to decay by 60 decibels or to 1/1,000,000th of its original intensity, quote unquote. That's the definition. Now, there were no books for me. How could I know that book, that definition? And how did I make my recordings? I used to go out and buy at home. I'd go out and I'd buy an Elvis Presley record, not to listen to it, to look at the picture on the back of the cover to see what kind of microphone and how far away it was from Elvis's mouth. I do anything I could. It's not like today. There's so many books out there on recording techniques in the music business. There are hundreds of them. Yeah. But I didn't get the job because I didn't know the definition of reverberation time. He was very, very specific on that. And I always say to my students, if that's a question on the exam, don't give a generic answer like, well, it's when the sound bounces back. Blah, blah, blah. It's the time it takes for the sound to decay by 60 decibels to 1/1,000,000th of its original intensity. That's the definition of reverberation time. And that's why I started this. One of the reasons I started the school, to have people really learn the technique and technology, not just by, well, I think I'm a talented guy, I know how to do this. And how do you know? Oh, I just feel it. You feel it in your gut. Well, that's part of it, but it takes more than that. And by the way, what is probably the most important skill for a recording engineer is not music knowledge, not music production, performing music. It's not the technology. It's human communication skills. I've heard it from Phil Ramone and Tom Dowd, the engineers, as I said, for Barbra Streisand and Rod Stewart and all the big names, and Bill Porter, who did 350 hit records, all the Elvis records, and Roy Orbison and the Everly Brothers. It's all about how you communicate with the engineer, the producer. If you're the engineer, how you communicate with the producer, maybe the artist manager that's putting up, or the executive producers putting up the money for renting the studio. You've got to communicate clearly and creatively. Very, very important.
Yeah, very interesting. That I guess. Well, this is the last picture that I chose. Who's that mariachi guy?
Well, the guy second from the left, believe it or not, that's Stevie Wonder, who was in the. This is taken at the Black Music Convention, the annual convention of the Black Music Association. And the convention that particular year of 1982 was in New Orleans. And there were about 1,000 people. And I was asked by the president of the association, who was on my advisory board at the time. And he said, David, you know something about the music business in Canada. The theme this year is Black music and international perspective. We're going to have people from different countries talking about Black music in their country. Would you be interested to give a talk on Black music in your country to the BMA? I said, oh, it would be an honor. Who's going to be there? I'd like to know who I'm talking to. Oh, just people interested in Black music, you know, the attorneys, the publicists, people for the record labels. They didn't tell me that Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson and Diana Ross and the Temptations and the Four Tops are all going to be there. And I'm on stage and they're in the audience listening to me giving a talk on Black music in Canada. And then Stevie Wonder came up to me afterwards with the fellow to his left, in the middle between me and him, Rod McGrew, who was managing the career and the label Solid Gold for one of the major black artists. And he's the one that introduced me on stage. And the fellow to Stevie's right is Edwin Birdsong, whose sister was Cindy Birdsong, one of the Supremes. Edwin Birdsong had a few regional hits in the United States, but he's a very, very close friend of Stevie Wonder's. So that's why he's in the picture with Rod McGrew and me. And I was just thrilled to be invited to speak at this convention. And it was just fabulous. Yeah. That and meeting and spending time with the Beatles were probably two highlights of my career.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's historic. Well, the Beatles particularly even more. Did you were you here when the last concert Stevie Wonder gave him in Montreal? I guess it was right after the death of Michael Jackson. I don't know if you managed to get there.
No, I didn't. As a matter of fact, I've attended quite a few concerts, but not. Whoops! Did we get cut off here?
Yeah, no. I just I put off the
photos. No, I've never attended a Stevie Wonder concert. As a matter of fact.
Oh, that's
no.
What's the most impressive artist you've seen? Even the working-wise and why?
Oh, by the way, I have to mention this. We all know that Michael Jackson was a megastar back then in 1982 when I was at that Black Music Convention. So the organizer of the convention asked me on this Thursday when I was giving the talk. He said, "Great talk. What are you doing on Saturday night?" I said, "Well, Saturday, this was in the Hilton Hotel. I'm going to be attending the concert with the Four Tops on stage in the ballroom, the Hilton." Well, are you there are 100 tables with 10 seats at each table for the 1,000 people in the ballroom. So the organizer says, "David, are you going to be seating with anybody in particular?" I said, I haven't had a chance to meet too many people. Not really. "Well, would you like to sit with Stevie Wonder?" I said, "Oh, it would be an honor. You got to be kidding." Well, you go to the very front table in front of the stage. There'll be a couple of security guards. You just say you're with Mr. M, which I did, and you'll sit down. So my wife and I are seated at this table with 10 seats. 8 of them are empty. The concert, no, they're serving dinner, the main course, the dessert, and then they announce, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a special concert for you guys. The Four Tops with an orchestra on the stage, the ballroom of the hotel," which is a lot nicer than being in an arena with 15,000 people. It's very intimate. And I'm sitting with my wife in the front. The lights go down. The concert starts. My wife and I are embarrassed. There are 990 people, black, and there are a couple of Caucasians, my wife and me and a few others. And we're sitting all by ourselves at not only at the dinner, but the show goes on. And you've got all these entertainment management people in the audience, close to 1,000. And you've got your Donna Summers and Diana Ross and the Temptations and Michael Jackson. But he was just like another one of the guys in the, at the convention. All of a sudden, I hear a din. I turn around because I'm in the front, and the huge doors to the ballroom open, and it's Ewart Abner, the manager of Stevie Wonder, with Stevie and the family, and they come down. They sit at the table. Now my table is full. And the Four Tops, after a couple of songs, say, Oh, we've got some special guests in the audience. Stevie Wonder. Tonight it's the five tops, not the four tops. Stevie, get up here. And Steve said, no, 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 no. It's your show. They had to come down and pull him up on the stage. Everybody in the audience stood up, not for Michael Jackson, but for Stevie Wonder is like a god. I didn't realize it until that moment that even though it was a place with all the leaders in the show business, in the music industry, they didn't jump up for all the others. But when Stevie came in, the lights went back on in the audience, and well, at least in the front, they put the spotlight on Stevie. They said, "Come on, Stevie, it's five tops tonight." I thought this was, I had tears in my eyes. This was just the most amazing experience.
Why do you think, why Stevie? I mean, why not? But
because of his talent. I'm not putting down the talents of a Michael Jackson, that's for sure. But Stevie Wonder has been around for so many decades. And in every decade, he's had not only recordings out, he's had hit records out. He is just not only a great talent and creative, but I mean, he's a genius musically, and they all love him. They all love him. And because he's also a down to earth kind of guy, and he's approachable. Now, in one of my campuses, I had two instructors. One was Stevie Wonder. This has nothing to do with this Stevie Wonder with the BMA convention, but I had Stevie Wonder's engineer and Stevie Wonder's producer teaching engineering and producing courses, not as a guest lecturer or for a special master class, but these were the regular weekly instructors that came in to teach. And these people actually had recorded two of the top 100 albums on the Rolling Stone magazine list of the top 100 albums of all time. Two of them were Stevie Wonder's, and both of them were recorded by my teachers. So my students maybe didn't appreciate the fact that they had some amazing people as their instructors. I mean, hearing from the best of the best, whether it was in any of the campuses of my colleges.
Amazing. All right, David. So I think we've kind of done the tour, and thanks so much for all this information and giving this.
If people want to get in touch with me, I'm always available for people who want more information, and hopefully when the book comes out, which will have a lot more detail than what I gave you here about my experiences and how to make a success, like 10 steps to succeeding in a career in the music business as a performer, as a songwriter, musician, or what have you, behind the scenes person.
Do you think
I just can't wait to share all this information through my book.
Can you maybe leave us with the last thing I wanted to ask? It's good that you did a segue into that about the business of music, and particularly making records. Like, is there any money to make there anymore? Because it seems to be really just the main artists right now with the streaming that can make money. And
yeah, the money is not, unfortunately. The streaming companies are ripping off the creative people, the songwriters and the musicians, mainly in the pop field. But where the musicians are going to make it is in merchandising, whether it's T-shirts or writing a book or doing a film, and live performances, which ironically right now is impossible because of the pandemic. But hopefully when things get back to some kind of a normal, musicians will be able to make a living again, because the money is mainly in performance and in owning the publishing rights. Because if you, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Gordon Lightfoot,
Yes.
a Canadian music treasure, doesn't have to perform ever in his life again. I mean, he can sit home and collect royalties from the songs that he has written, that hundreds of people have recorded, other versions, you know, there's so many versions out there. He loves performing, so that's why he's still out there doing it. But it's owning your, never, this is one piece of advice, never as a songwriter or a performer sell your rights. If somebody offers you $500, $1,000, or even $3,000, you don't sell your music rights. You assign them, you lease them out. And that's a whole other subject. But you always own them. Well, I don't say always, you own it for your life and for, depending on the country of the copyright law, for so many decades beyond the life of the owner. So it can go, royalties will go into your children and grandchildren, but never sell them for money, for cash. Always assign them. That way you still own them. Phil Spector, Phil Spector, to this day, you will not see any of his or hear any of his recordings on Time Life or Rhino Records or the ones that put out reissues. Why? Because he was the first executive teenager, the first guy when he's 18 years old to understand the value of the copyright, and he always owned the copyright. I don't know what it did for him while he was in prison for years, but I have kind of like a little sick joke. What was the essence of the wall of sound? There's a lot of echo. He must have really liked it in jail because there's a lot of echo in prison. No, but seriously, he always owned his rights to the songs, to the material, songs that he wrote, whether he produced them or what have you.
But that means, yeah. Sorry,
that's why.
But that means that you're saying that maybe copyrights are gonna change in the future. That's the hope, because I mean, otherwise, why keep the rights if anybody, you're not gonna make money with it?
No, but copyright is always, copyright goes back to France. It goes back to some of the copyright in France goes back 100, 150 years. 200, it goes, and it's much more, for example, when a singer sings a song in France live, they could make thousands of dollars for that song, not because they were performing, but they wrote the song, right? Mm-hmm. The songwriter gets thousands. When they perform in North America, it's peanuts, because copyright is not respected in the same way here. And whenever the copyright legislators talk about increasing the royalty rate for songwriters, it's not something that the voter is going to vote for your member of parliament to increase copyright. They want better education. They want the streets to be working right. They don't want bridges falling apart. These are issues that come up for the members of parliament. When it comes to copyright, say, who's interested in that? Musicians? Well, who cares? And there are definitely some lobbyists in the last couple of years that are working hard to have greater recognition for the songwriters, but it's an uphill battle.
Oh well, we'll see what happens with that. Because at the end, like, if the artist, other from touring, you mentioned an important point, is the merchandise and all that. But at one point, if you're a musician, you're a musician. You're not there to make T-shirts and all this kind of things, Well,
that's the dilemma. See, that's the dilemma that musicians, when they're first starting out, they're doing it just to be on stage, to be loved by an audience, to get the applause, to get the recognition. They don't think of the money, but when they see that somebody else is making the big royalty checks, making all the money, the publishers, the record labels, the concert promoters, the streaming companies, they're making the money. All of a sudden they say, whoa, there's tens of millions of dollars out there. How come I'm not on the receiving end? But then it's too late. Then you got to go with lawyers and lawsuits. That's why it's important to protect yourself from the very beginning, because very few people, it's true, only a few hundred are going to make that big time out of the millions. But you want to be prepared to be one of those few, not just to be famous like my David Mustaine, famous, but he had to come to our school to learn management, to not get screwed, you know?
So,
It's also important.
I mean, your advice is, first off, like, yeah, when you say the copyrights, you mean like the master track, like if you're doing an album, to make sure that you're owner of this, and you're just leasing it to the record company. That's a little bit what your solution is.
But it's a constant fight between the record company and the publisher and the artist, because if you're talking about a major label, they are in a power situation, and you're starting out as a musician. You can't demand necessarily all of what you would like in terms of control. So they try and take away. They want to be. They want a piece of they want a big piece of the action, not just your performance recording rights, but they want a piece of your t-shirt sales, your performance, live performance, and the artist manager is saying, wait a minute, you're a record company. Why are you? They want these, what are now called 360-degree deals. They want 360 deals. They want not just the royalty from the sales of the record, because they realize that's limited. They want a piece of every part of the artist. And if you don't go with it, then the label says, well, we're not going to sign you. We'll take somebody else. They're very independent. Now, if it comes to a Streisand or a Michael Jackson or Kanye West, Lady Gaga, Jennifer Lopez, these are in a position of power, especially after a number of hit records. So they can start naming their terms the way they want them. But it's all a negotiation. And that's why it's important for the artist, the performer, the songwriter, to understand the whole issue about copyright. So when you're sitting in the boardroom negotiating with these sharp lawyers, that you understand. You may not know in great detail, like the entertainment lawyer that you've engaged sitting next to you, but at least you have an understanding, and you didn't just assign everything to the lawyer. Look what happened with Leonard Cohen when he went into what was it? He went into was it Tibet? He went into the meditation and left. He left this world, so to speak, for a number of years, and his manager stole all of his money. And the same thing happened with the Beach Boys, and there's the classic case of this record label, Roulette Records, with Morris Levy. Maybe I mentioned it before, when he had Little Anthony and the Imperials with all his hit records. He goes up to the president and he says, I hear my records on the radio, the top 10, and the records are selling like crazy. How come I don't get any royalty? So Morris Levy says, royalty? You want royalty? I don't give royalty. If you want royalty, go to see Queen Elizabeth in England. And although there are a lot of honest people, there are a lot of people with questionable honesty in this business, and you just got to be careful. Check out, get references before you sign up with anybody, especially if it's for a long term. You're going to be married to that organization if you're signing up with them,
Do you think about labels? Do you think an artist to make good money, do you really need a label, or is it possibly
Well, okay, here's the difference. You sign up with a record label, they've got hundreds of employees across the country to promote you in live venues, in good times without the pandemic around. They've got you on radio. They know how to get in there. But they'll pay you on a $20 CD. You get $2. You put out your own CD. You own it. You do what you want, where you want, but you don't have the opportunity for selling 1 million. You don't have the contacts. But instead of making $2, you pay $1 or $2 to manufacture it. You sell it for 10 or 15, and you pocket on $10. You pocket $8 profit. Or if it's going for 15, you pocket $13 instead of getting $2. But you might only sell several hundred copies. It's a decision you got to make. Do you want to go, if you have that opportunity, to go with a major or independent? Now, independent could be you yourself starting your own independent label. And there's a directory called the Indie Bible, which is a great directory of contacts in every area of the business for people that want to start their own production label. There was also a book called How to Make and Sell Your Own Record many years ago. I don't know if it's still available, by Diane Rappaport. It was a very, very good book. And of course, one of the best books in the field of the business of music, covering everything from the technical to some degree, a lot on copyright publishing, concert promotion, and so on, is the Music Business Handbook and Career Guide by the late Dr. David Baskerville, the guru of music business education. Excellent book. And if you're interested in a Canadian document, the best one, probably the only one, from a legal standpoint, is Musicians and the Law in Canada, written by entertainment lawyer Paul Sanderson. And if you're going into the music business and you're a musician, you really want to know what's in that book. It covers a lot. It can be very technical, and it's a legal, it's a book on the law, but the law that pertains to you and protecting your rights as a musician or a songwriter.
All right, David. So, well, thanks a lot again for this wonderful conversation. And I guess, so what's again your email? Maybe people want to contact you or have other additional questions. I'm actually gonna look here at my right, see if we got some questions from the auditor, some other questions, because I haven't.
Yeah, you have my email address at davidpleonard1@gmail.com. And you also got an actual address if anybody wants to send me any documentation to an actual real address, the PO Box 32.
All right. I'll profit and say my address too. My email address, adrian@lascena.org. So if you want to send any questions for David, and you forgot his email, adrian@lascena.org is mine. Or if you want to be interviewed in the program too, contact me, and then we'll see what we can do. For now, I thanks to David Leonard, and I don't know, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with just have your own?
I'd just like to say, if you're in the biz or graduating from a music school or just starting out and want to make it, persevere. Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't compromise on the branding of what you are. You may have a certain genre or style of music that you like to produce and perform. And sometimes the executives that you might be working with, or it's a record label or whatever, might try and say, well, that's not what's out there now. You should change your style. Never compromise that way. You've got to believe in your heart and your soul, what you are, what your brand is, and of course, listen to experts, listen to people that are out there, know what's happening in the industry. Network, network, network. It's not as easy as it was before the pandemic, but it's so important because you never know when that next connection, that network person, is the one that's really going to help you to skyrocket to the top. I think it was the world famous DJ Casey Kasem in his broadcast. At the end of every broadcast, he always said, whatever you do, search for the stars, but keep your feet on the ground, and you may be a star yourself someday.
Well, that's great, David. And so I actually before leaving, I wanted to invite everybody again to participate a little bit in the singing St. Valentine's by ordering a serenade. That's the things that are coming on. We're really concentrating on St. Valentine's, and I wanted to invite David to watch our show on St. Valentine's Day on the 14th here on Facebook. We'll be having it in Facebook and YouTube. Yeah, see, maybe you can tell me what you think about the sound and about the performance there. I'll be doing some of the sound recording myself, and I'll be also performing some of the pieces. So I would really like to have your impressions for the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate being here.
All right, thanks, David. And I'm Don Adriano. He was David Leonard, and see you next time around. We're gonna try to continue with the La Scena Tête here twice per month. Yeah, you can write me at adrian@lascena.org, adrian@lascena.org. You can also check our website, myscena.org. We actually, our journalist, Arthur Tennis, wrote a piece about David Leonard and some of the things we talked here today. Thanks so much to everybody for tuning in, and have a great night. Thanks, David.